Welcome to the Good Ideas Club,
where big ideas spark even bigger conversations.
Today's guest is someone who spent his career unlocking creativity and helping teams solve real-world problems through bold thinking.
He's led campaigns for global brands, run innovation programs around the world, and now helps leaders spark breakthroughs through his company, Lightbulb.
From agencies to boardrooms to stages like TEDx, SXSW, he's all about creating environments where ideas and people can thrive.
Tim Leake, we're so glad to have you here. Welcome to the club. Tell us a bit more about your journey.
Well, thanks, guys. It's great to be here. Where to start? Well, so if you said career, I mean, I guess I have a pretty unicorn is this word that people talk about a lot, but I feel it in my soul when we talk about a unicorn because I've never met anybody with such a weird background as me. And I met one other person with an equally weird background that was different. And he described it as making himself uniquely unhireable because nobody knows what box to put you in. And so I think ultimately the best point for people like us is to then go create our own companies. So that explains where I'm at now. But the beginning of my career was on the creative side of the advertising world. So I was a copywriter and then eventually a creative director. But I got my start at a very well respected, and we were like agency of the, I think we're agency of the decade that decade, and agency of the year 3 of the years that I was there, which was TBWA Shy Day here in Los Angeles where I live. At the Shy Day is famous for the Apple campaign, which I did not work on, but I was in the room where it happened. I didn't work on it, but I was there. But I worked on the Taco Bell Chihuahua, Energizer Bunny, and several other accounts, but those were very famous campaigns back in the day. And it was a really fun time to be there and fun time to be all about creativity. And I eventually had moved to New York City. I was working for an agency called Saatchi & Saatchi in New York. And at that point, the digital revolution was in full force. Like literally, it betrays how old I am when we talk about where the internet was. The internet existed when I started working. It did not exist when I started college. So there's a good balance of my age, I guess. But it didn't really become like this full force, like transformative thing until what year? So this was probably 15 years ago now, at about 2010. Am I doing my math right? Yeah, geez. Yeah, about then is when all of a sudden it was like, oh, it's changing everything. Before then, it was like websites and there was stuff, but I think it's really with the dawn of social media, it was changing everything, and the whole nature of marketing was shifting massively because up to that point, all we really did was TV commercials and outdoor boards. Like it was very easy in hindsight how to do advertising campaigns, and you just spent a lot of money and that would increase business and it was easy. And then social media and more digital channels came about and everything got more complicated, everything got harder. That led me to a Swedish company called Hyper Island, where I first took a course that they did called the Hyper Island Master Class for executives. And I didn't necessarily define myself as an executive, but my role was a creative director at the time. There was a lot of really, really amazing big people in that class. And I went through it and I realized, oh, I kind of get this at a way that a lot of other people don't. And one of the reasons I think is because my parents were both, as I was growing up, they were both computer programmers, and I'd gotten into computers as a kid. And I used to use these things called bulletin board systems, which is like this very early precursor to the internet. Like you would use a modem to call in and leave messages, and then you would hang up and other people could call in and then check the bulletin board. That's how it worked. That's how we did messages back then. So I kind of got the culture of digital and the thinking of that. And went back and started doing more innovative work within the agency that I was at and with clients, and eventually then went to work. I started becoming a speaker and a facilitator within the Hyper Island classes. So as they were scaling this because everybody needed this, I was doing that on the side of my agency gig. And I started liking that part more than I liked the agency gig part. So at a certain point I jumped and I joined Hyper Island full time. So I was working with really big clients, doing digital transformation programs and helping facilitate those and basically inspire these really amazing companies and really smart people to navigate this change, radical change that was happening at the time. After a few years of that, one of my clients during that phase was an ad agency, a very large independent ad agency in the United States called RPA, and they hired me to join their executive team. So hired me away. So then I got to sort of do both. I was back to then doing Hyper Island on the side, but I was working full time as part of the executive team and did that for about a decade, where I was basically, the way I always describe that role is I was helping the agency become everything our clients needed us to be before our clients knew that was what they needed. And I thought that was always a great way of just being, eyeing the trajectory of how are you going to get there a little bit ahead of where we needed to be. Because if you're too late, you won't win business, you won't help your clients, they'll fire you and go elsewhere. If you're too early, you're just talking about hypothetical stuff that isn't applicable yet. So you have to thread that line. But the interesting thing is in the role that I had, I often like to say I was in charge of nothing because everybody else, every other discipline had somebody who led it. So all I could do was facilitate that process. I couldn't tell the creative team or the media team or the strategy team or whoever, you need to do it this way. That didn't stop me from probably being vocal about it, but I couldn't affect that. All I could do was create situations and facilitate that process. So the facilitation really became my superpower during this time. And I've just been a big believer in it, in sort of the unreasonable power of facilitation to speed things up, to make work more fun, to achieve more in a massively shorter time than the regular way we work around stuff. And I applied it in new business pitches that we're doing. I applied it in new client meetings. I applied it internally for our own innovation projects, just across the board, as well as doing it on the side with Hyper Island. So when then I started my own company, which is called Let's Lightbulb, I focused it around facilitation. And then right now I'm actually in the process of focusing it even more specifically on speed and helping companies basically make speed their unfair advantage, because I think that is increasingly this place where not enough people focus on that. They think about speed all the time, but they think about speed through the tools mostly. And so AI is rapidly making the tools faster. And so that helps speed up tasks. But when we want to speed up teams, that's where my company can help. And so it can be in straight up workshop facilitation where we are doing it and we speed the team up that way, but also developed several other aspects of what I call the 5 facets of fast, which is a framework that if you get all 5 of these things right, the teams themselves and the collaboration really starts moving quickly. And facilitation is one of those core pillars. So that was a lot of talking.
Well, that's
Yeah.
that's a diverse career. That's incredible. No, thanks for sharing that. I mean, I completely echo your passion for facilitation. I think it's like when I learned to do it, I kind of was super envious that I'd never had anyone teach me this before, and that
Right.
I'd never had someone kind of take my thoughts, combine them, when I was working with others to help us get from A to B. Like you said, speed is such an important thing. But there's something else, like when we were doing it for INSO, trying to work out, how do we describe facilitation in a way that people can understand? And we say we can help people get from A to B, whatever that A to B looks like for them, with
Yeah.
speed, direction, and confidence. Because I think speed is one thing, right? But if you're
Yeah.
going very fast in the wrong direction, that's a
Right.
bad thing, right? So the direction part of it was really important to us to bring in. And then the confidence, I think, is just a nice wrapper that the facilitation gives you that confidence, right?
Yeah.
It's like having someone in the room that can just reassure you, maintain momentum, prod you when you need, slow you down if you think there's something else to be teased out, and just act as a bit of a guide, be the guide on the wall, right?
Yeah, well, and that really is. You are the guide, and if you think of it almost as being on rails, right? Like, how do I help the clients and put them on rails so they just take off, they jet, and they know which direction they're supposed to go? It kind of works like that. And you said something a second ago about slowing down when necessary, and I think that's one of the most interesting aspects of how to speed up, is that one of the reasons that people think they're speeding up but actually do it badly is that they're just rushing chaotically. And so that actually creates more friction in the system. It's as if you had 10 people and you put them in the middle of the city and say, Go find a supermarket. Like they're all just going to run different directions. There's no process to it. But if you give them a map, they'll all run the same direction. And sometimes you need to slow down and plot out the map and figure out like where you're going to go first and then run. And that's going to be a lot faster than just running. And that slowing down part of it, I think, is underappreciated, certainly underdone. And it doesn't mean slowing down your progress. It means slowing down the process. I'm just making these words up, but you're like slowing down the process that you're using to be able to get there.
Makes entire sense to me.
It's a good way to jump straight into the 5 facets of fast and how you kind of came across that.
No, I think like in any framework you put together, you come across it based on your own experience, what you see, learning, and then it's kind of like how you assemble it together later on. And so there's lots of different frameworks out there for different things, and undoubtedly some are more. I find truth in almost every framework, every person's perspective or whatever, and then this is ours, right? Undoubtedly, there's maybe something missing, but in terms of how we came about it, it felt like these 5 things, which I'll explain in a second. These 5 things, when you have all 5 of them, it works really well, and if you're missing one of them, something grinds to a halt. And I then caveat them to say that these are around teamwork, right? This is not about an individual moving fast. That can be done with the tools. That's a lot of that. It has to do with how the team moves together. And so the 5 facets of fast, I'll explain these more, but it's think fast, collaborate fast, work fast, learn fast, and align fast. And so think fast is adopting a speed mindset. I think there are a lot of companies out there that actually don't operate with the right mindset that is biased towards moving quickly. And this idea of going slow to go fast that we just talked about is part of that. Like that is part of the mindset, that it isn't about rushing. It isn't about chaos. It's about working intelligently, but it is also working with a bias towards action, for instance, that we aren't going to talk about stuff and make sure we've figured it out. We've dotted our T's and we've got 18 levels of VPs and SVPs and EVPs and C-level people that have to all sign off on exactly what we're going to do before we do it, because then we become a culture of PowerPoint. And there are a lot of cultures out there that are cultures of PowerPoint. It's talking about what we're going to do for literally months before ever starting to do it. And then they do it, and then they realize something needs to change, and it sets off this other chain of PowerPoints in order to approve the change. When you have a bias towards action, we're like, this seems like what we want to do. Let's try it. Let's try it. And then it's more about reporting back on what we tried and learning from that, adjusting and figuring it out as you go, so that you have buy-in with, like, the buy-in gets easier because you actually tried it already. You're just not rolling it out on a massive scale right away. You're figuring out what works and implementing it. And so I digress a little bit about that particular thing, but there's a lot of elements of the mindset that are really, really important to be able to get through first and foremost, because if that mindset isn't there, it doesn't matter what systems or structure or whatever else is going to be. It doesn't matter how much the executive team is bought up. If the day-to-day people within the company don't have the same mindset, it doesn't matter how much the project management team believes this if the executive team doesn't buy it. And so the whole company at a cultural level has to buy in. And something I don't think I said earlier actually is that really the approach that I've built is about culture change. It is about embedding speed into the culture of a company. And that's what's different. And I think you have to do this on all 5 of these levels. So that speed mindset is the first one. Collaborate fast is mastering the art of internal facilitation. And I use that word specifically because I'm not trying to teach the group to go be facilitators the way we are, where a company would necessarily hire them to do that. But when you become masters of internal facilitation, that is often something that just, I can't think of any company out there that for this role would go hire somebody like INSO or hire somebody like Lightbulb to go do that. That would be cost prohibitive, right? You're not going to have them come in and do and facilitate every single meeting that every group has internally, because that wouldn't make sense.
Great.
It would be great for us, but I just can't see anybody. Why would a company want to take?
Yeah.
It would make more sense to hire somebody internally. And so the point is, if you develop this culture of facilitation internally, I think it is a fantastic role, by the way, for mid-level people, like mid-level. I call them mid-level leaders because they're going to be leaders in this case. But often they're not so junior anymore that they just need to learn or take notes, right? They're people with opinions and skills. But if there's more senior people in the room, the senior people in the room will take up all the oxygen in terms of ideating and this is something I see done actually kind of poorly is they feel like, well, I need to let the younger people like have their way. So they shut up and the senior people don't say anything the mid-level people do it, but then the senior people change everything later on because they can see
Yeah.
things that
And it
mid-level
just
people can't.
it just undermines everything you did. And then people
Right.
only do that a few times. You're like, what is the point in me even giving a second more brain power or energy towards this just because it's going to get kiboshed by leadership? Like I've seen that as well, and it's painful.
Totally.
Painful.
Totally. But if you reframe the people in the middle, that their job is actually to act as a facilitator. So
Mm.
their job is to be the guide, and their job is to help bring out the best out of the leadership team.
Mm.
Well, now they are a servant leader, and which is a style of leadership that we practiced at the agency I was at, RPA. And it always really resonated with me, this idea of servant leadership, which is as a leader, your job is to bring out the best in everybody around you. And if you start training the people that are then in the middle to be able to do this, they then can go squeeze all the brilliance juice out of the senior team in a shorter amount of time. The senior team feels like, oh, I got everything I wanted out of that, but they weren't the ones leading the meeting. The mid-level people were leading the meeting as the facilitator. And that becomes really, really powerful. And then when they can go and do that with clients, or you can do that with customers, or you can do that with other stakeholders, that becomes a superpower. But there's an other part of this, which is, and I'm sure you guys have hit this before, especially internally, if you want to facilitate a group, the group also has to want to be facilitated. It becomes very, very challenging when the group didn't expect to be facilitated and all of a sudden a meeting is run that way. And so when I talk about a culture of facilitation within a company, we want to build this culture where they expect to be facilitated and people know how to facilitate them. And that becomes win-win because that friction of, okay, we're going to do this a certain way is like, oh, they just want to talk. People want to default to this. Let me just say everything I want to say out loud, even though it isn't effective. And that's fine. There's lots of things we want to do, but there's a reason that we have processes and there's a reason that we do things in the right order and all of that. And a facilitated experience is going to help get the group there faster. They're going to have more fun doing it. There's going to be less politics involved. Everybody's voice is going to be heard. Everything gets better when you inject facilitation into that process, but it has to be part of the culture. So that's the second facet. The third is working fast, which is creating simple systems. And I think the smartest companies out there use SOPs, standard operating practices, or playbooks, or whatever you want to, checklists. It doesn't really matter what you call them. I tend to call them playbooks when we do them, but different people call them different things. But the point is that you've got systems built such that everybody knows what is supposed to happen and what to do. And I don't have to guess at what those things are. And they're also built in a way that they are easy to quickly update when somebody has a better way of doing it, because a system should not be a I'm fond of saying that we don't really need to worry about best practices today. We need to worry about next practices because the speed of change is happening too fast. So how do you figure out, how do we learn from everything that has worked in the past, but then also see you know 5 steps in front of us to figure out how that needs to change, because it inherently, any best practices or system was built for the past, the world of the past, not the world of the future. So you have to balance that part out. So those things have to work in tandem. The interesting thing about that is that building out all those systems can be very laborious and hard and a bit of a grind. But if you do it in a workshop style format, it becomes fun, it becomes done quickly, it captures everybody's voices in there, the group feels ownership of it. So Facilitation, by the way, spoiler alert, filters over all 5 facets of fast, even though it is itself only one. The way we would integrate it is by helping the group actually understand the process of doing that and then learn to do it themselves and then apply it ongoing, so that they have then this built-in culture of using systems. Because I have worked in places that have them and they're brilliant. If I don't know what to do, I don't have to bug anybody. I just find it. And especially now with AI, it's easier to find and get these answers than ever before, but it still has to be documented. It's so easy to just go find the answer and go, awesome, I'm empowered, I'm off. Whereas if they're waiting for somebody else to make a decision to explain it, or if I can't move forward because I need input from 6 people, now we're not moving fast. It goes too slow. And if it isn't clear how it's supposed to happen, you also then end up with 5 people running that way, 5 people running a different direction, 3 people running north. It's just that matters. And I use the word simple systems deliberately, because also a lot of times project managers or the type of people, often account managers, there are people who are really good at systems thinking in the first place. And then there are people like me. I'm good at systems thinking, but at a creative way. I'm actually not good at complex systems thinking. It needs to be simplified. And where I have seen systems break is because they become too complicated for regular people. They get lost in the nitty gritty. And so it has to be simple enough to be a guide that then people can follow over and over. So that's the third one. The fourth one is learn fast, which is a shortcut to shared understanding. Change is happening faster than it's ever happened for how long now? Almost 15 years. I think I've had a presentation that I called Change Will Never Be This Slow Again. And the whole point is that the pace of change will continue to increase and increase and increase. And I've always said that, and it's always been true, and it's always felt a little uncomfortable. And then ever since ChatGPT came out, it went boom and rocket ship fast how quickly things are changing. In the last week or two, there's been a rollout of new stuff in AI that I can't wrap my head around. And so how do we do this? How do we adjust to these changes as a team, not just individuals, but as a team? How do we adjust to these changes quickly when we also have to do our job full time and we're already too busy and there's already too many things to do and all this stuff? And so creating a constant learning culture where it becomes easy for the group to rapidly understand something new and quickly decide, how are we going to apply this or activate it within our own systems, within what we do and how we deliver? Is this important to us? Yes, maybe not right now. No, there's lots of ways to go within that. But we have to be able to learn that quickly and not have it be, well, some people are really good at it. And I think the way a lot of companies do it is they say, well, okay, Alex is he's our AI guy. He's the one in charge of that. We'll have a chief innovation officer. We have somebody who's in charge of thinking about what's coming, and everybody else is just doing their job. I don't think that works at the pace things are going. Everybody has to understand what it is. Not everybody has to be an expert, right? But they have to understand what it is and then be able to move forward. So that's the fourth one. And then the last one is align fast, which is about leadership teams and creating leadership team sprints. And this actually is the nub of what I had been doing within my company, which is something I called high ROI offsites, which is if we're going to gather the leadership team and we're going to spend a day or two thinking through stuff, that should be done focused on as high ROI challenges as possible. It shouldn't be about trust falls and just like team bonding, which is good. I love team bonding, but team bonding isn't the point. Team bonding is a nice output or side effect of the fact that we solved some meaty problems at a leadership level quickly. And that, of course, is also facilitated, but it's a different thing. It's a very specific type of workshop approach or sprint that a leadership team can do at a regular cadence that you could train somebody else even internally to be able to run on behalf of that leadership team so that they make important decisions at a regular basis, and it's not reactive in the moment. It's slowing down, it's thinking, that's all that stuff we thought about before. So those are the 5 sides of it. And I feel like if you remove any one of them, like if you don't have systems built in and documented, you can be great at facilitation, you can have vision and everything, but you're gonna have a lot of people that don't know what they're supposed to do at any given moment. So you need that. If you have all the others, but you don't have leadership team sprints, for instance, if the leadership team isn't providing that clarity and that guidance at a regular basis, things will grind to a halt. And if you don't have the mindset, things will grind to a halt. If you aren't learning and adjusting, and you think that the world we're reacting to is what it was when we started this process 3 years ago, things will grind to a halt. So you need all 5.
Yeah. Oh my God, there's so much to unpack there. I mean, one thing that really resonated with me on that is, and one of the things that the people I speak to and our clients have a anxiety about at the senior leadership level is robust succession planning in companies. And I love this idea of, investing the fast framework into the mid, the junior to mid-level managers, because I think that solves a really nice problem. Well, one, you're training that level who are the future generation who are going to be the leadership. So you're investing into the
Yes.
future. By the time they are that senior mid, it's just a matter of time. They will, and then they will have diversified, of course, in different companies and different sectors and different industries. So they're taking that knowledge and sharing it. So I love that from a
Yeah.
collaboration point of view. But they're also close enough to the juniors who are going to be participants of what this layer are doing, and so they'll learn by doing, they'll have the experience. I just think it's a really nice way. It's a really solid place to point this level of training in order to develop and embed it deep into a culture. But of course, like you said, you do need the senior leadership's buy-in, because without that, without ideas being adopted by this layer, it will burn out very quickly.
And I think they have to, like, the mindset is where it's really important to them, right? If they adopt the mindset, the rest of the group can implement it. And because senior executives are usually the hardest to train in some a completely new skill building thing, mainly because they don't need it. Like, they've already ascended to the top of their game, playing the game the way they do. They don't like, they need that sort of stuff. But then they, at the same time, they might get frustrated that the rest of the organization is not moving quickly. They feel like they've got to drag it along. Like, why does nothing happen until I gather everybody in a room and shake them? Like, that's why what they feel like. Why is this group just not doing it? Because they didn't have the structure that empowers the vision of the executive team. So it's there, and I love what you said about succession planning, because it is real. And there's an extra side or an extra benefit to this, which is also about turnover. Like, yes, by the very nature, you can't ever, leadership teams are pyramids, so there will never be as many spots at the tippy top as there are in the middle, or as there are at the bottom. It's just the nature of the game. So of course, yes, people will leave, but you don't want your best people to leave. You want your best people to stay and or come back at the very least. And so I think the interesting thing about this is, if you create a culture that it's more fun to work here because we make better progress and we've got these great systems and it just works brilliant, and then you want to go and you want to make more money by going to this other company and they don't do that, you're going to be unhappy over there. And I know a lot of people, we were famous at the agency at RPA for boomerang employees. People would jump and they would go someplace else, and then a year and a half, they would come back. And because places are chaotic elsewhere, and if you're not operating this way, and so it becomes this win-win on so many levels, and you get really strong mid-level. I keep saying mid-level. What's funny is, even you can be quite a senior leader, but then there's still like 8 levels of executives above you
Yeah.
these days. So mid-level might not even be the right word, but it's
No,
leaders,
I know what you mean.
young leaders, or your next generation of leaders, however we want to explain it. And another interesting side effect of AI, this is going to be especially hitting the younger levels, but I think we're going to start to see it. I've got 2 visions for how it could go, but I do think we're going to start to see this challenge reverberate over the next 10 years. And somebody once shared this term for it that they called the mentorship gap, which is a lot of work that we would have younger people do can be handled by AI now. So that means we need less of them to do it, which means that in the future, you're going to have we're going to have a gap between people who had any experience doing it and the amount of leaders that we need. And so they're not getting mentored along the way. They're not having that experience. Even if you have, and you should have a leadership team that is leaning into the AI tools. Well, now they're just busy with the AI tools and they're not talking with real people and mentoring the younger people like they used to. That's a real challenge. The flip that may be the case too, by the way, is that younger people are going to by default start off thinking at a higher level because they're going to integrate the AI will actually become the junior team. And so junior people will automatically be managers from a mindset point of view off the get-go. They're going to have to act like, say, a creative director where AI gives them 50 ideas and they have to strategically think about what the best one is. But not everybody thinks that way. I'm hearing stories about people going in and they've done the work with AI and then a client asks them why they have this strategy and they can't answer it. They're like, well, this is what AI said. They've absolved responsibility. That has to change, but that's a
I
whole
like, you know,
different spin where you get into.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's, I mean, one thing that I'm drawn to that, I mean, I see both of those options. And I think in reality, like most things, it'll lie somewhere between the two and probably fluctuate depending on the circumstance of the context at the time. But one thing that I'm drawn to here is, you know, in any case of what AI does or doesn't do, human beings are the factor that we care most about in this
Yeah.
equation. And human beings inherently do not like change that often. I mean, we were talking, I can't remember who we
Yes.
were talking to the other day about, like, you know, you change someone's desk and it feels like, oh, that's a huge change. And I can't remember who said that. I was talking to someone recently, but that was just a nice kind of putting it to context. You know, we're talking about all this massive change in the office, and yet, you know, we can strip it right back, irrespective of AI or not. If you change someone's desk, it throws them off, right? And
Yes.
so for me, it's like, are you a fundamental person who can just cope with change? If yes, you're going to adapt and better in this world of, like you said, increasingly fast change at an unprecedented speed. If you're not, where do you fit? That's you know, I love change. I'm used to change, so I feel like I'm okay with it. But even I'm like,
Yeah.
oof, I can't keep up with AI. Like you said, I have no idea. I have no idea what release you're talking about in the last week or 2 weeks. And by the time
Oh,
this episode's been edited and released, what you just said there will be old and something else will be new, right? I mean, it's a crazy amount of change, and most people just, I think, just like to turn up to work and have a bit of reliability and a bit of
yes.
predictability. You know, it comes back to that systems thing, right? You talk about systems
Yeah.
being reliable and predictable
Mhm.
and just easy, and got it. There's a connection there, right?
Yeah. I actually love what you just said. I should add it to my sales pitch because the
Yeah.
extra thing about systems is systems give back the reliability that we've lost by change, but you can't, but without absolving ourselves from adapting to the change, right? I will always know what I'm supposed to do as long as it's documented, but also the document is a living, breathing thing. And that's part of the system that we built is that it's always going to be updated. That actually helps because you're right. As human beings, we crave certainty and we can like change, but I'm going to borrow something that my friend Mark Comerford is who I stole this from. He's a brilliant speaker. He was one of the main speakers at Hyper Island when I first started, and very much a friend and mentor to me. And two things that I stole from him, and one is when you talk about change, because I like change too. Like I'm the type of person who says I like change and I embrace it. And I've always been in the. But the reality is that we like the change we like. We don't like change. We like the change that we like. And so if that change benefits us, we like it. If I'm getting a new desk and that desk has a better view and a better monitor and setup, I generally like it. If they just move me across the room and I got the same thing, but I'm in a different place, it's annoying. And if I got a worse spot, I'm mad. And so all three are change. Change is just change. It's a matter of what happens with it. And the other part that I stole from him, which is part of a workshop. It's part of the same workshop that I mentioned earlier, where I put at the beginning of change will never be the same, this slow again, is I asked that question of who here likes change. And then the very first, so you got a group of like 30 people in a workshop or whatever, and they've settled down at their seats and they've got their laptops open and their, whatever, their bagel and a coffee or something. And I said, that's great that everybody likes change. So now everybody go find a new seat. And it
Mhm.
can't be the one right next to you. Like, and it is funny. It takes 5 minutes of moaning and groaning and people like, "Rah," and then picking up their coffee and their bagel and their laptop
Yeah.
and settling down someplace else. And a lot of them had found a cord to plug in and then they got to move that. I did this at one time it was at a bigger conference because I think there's like 100 people. I have a video of this one, and a lot of them had. It was one of those that had desks with a little cord hole in it, so you could like weave your cord. They'd been set up good, and now they all had to go move to a new spot.
Fantastic.
And then it's like, so how do you like change now? How many of you would like that to change? And I was like, all right. And they realized that was just finding a new seat during a workshop. It's very equivalent to your example of find a.
But then I wonder what percentage. So if you were gonna have that same group and without actually making them change, if you were gonna say sort of, well, I don't know how you could do this more scientifically and with better results, but if you were to say you're about to have a change of desks and you've got the choice, you can either stay where you are or upgrade to a desk that's say 10-20% better than what you're doing now for
Yeah.
whatever factor that is for that person. Could be a view, could be screen quality, whatever it may be. I wonder how many. There's an element here of kind of laziness as well. Like, what's the
Totally.
actually, I just even though it's better, I just can't be asked. Like what's that balance?
I know. It's like, how much better does it need to be before you're willing to do it? As soon as you
Uh,
said that, it just reminded me of like I was at RPA for 10 years, and that whole time I was only in 2 offices really. So I had one office one time, and then with this like shuffle up where everybody's gonna sit. And I don't know if my new office was better. It was just different. It was better in some ways and worse in other ways. So it's just different, one of those things, but you just had to deal with it. And it was literally got everything boxed up. And it is a lot to move, especially when you're in an office as opposed to a desk. You have accumulated stuff and got it to the new thing. And then 1 week later, COVID shut everything down. And I did not empty those boxes for 3.5 years. So it was like, even when we were kind of back in the office, like a couple days a week, I still just couldn't be bothered to like empty the boxes anymore.
yeah.
Y- It's a lot. Moving is hard. You're about to move.
I'm recording this for listeners. I'm in an empty room now. I'm in a cupboard as my desk because I don't have it. Watch it. Yeah,
Right.
talk about COVID. Sorry, I'm taking a bit of a pivot here. How did COVID affect your career? As a facilitator, did you find the transition to online facilitating pretty easy?
And,
How else
and
did it affect you?
so again, for context, I was at the agency at the time. So this would have been 5.5 years ago, right? So I was at the agency midway through. So I was doing facilitation, but I also had other, facilitation was how I achieved the stuff that I did. I was not a full-time facilitator, but we worked a lot with clients. I've said this often, and I don't think it was a unique situation. It is weird, in my opinion, how COVID hit and we had just the right technology. Like 3 or 4 years earlier, it would have still been hard, and at that point, we
Mm,
had just the right technology to basically switch to virtual overnight, and that same week, we had just moved things. We were in the middle of, like, pitching new business and all these we had all this stuff going on, and obviously, you had to adjust to what our clients had to adjust to right away, but internally, I was amazed that it was like on Monday, we're like, "Oh, we're not coming in." And on Tuesday, we just switched to Zoom. I think I figured out then Mural as a whiteboarding platform. I don't think I was using it already. I think I discovered
mm.
it during the pandemic, but my memory is hazy. But it was quickly. It was like within that 2 weeks, like, well, how would I do a workshop? Oh, look at this cool thing. This already exists and it's amazing. And I never had a need to use an online whiteboarding platform because we always did things in person before that. Like, we forget that was only 6 years ago, but we forget we just never did workshops online before that. I did use Zoom and Skype and stuff like that occasionally, but it was more just to talk with people, more one-on-one. I can't think of I remember doing it with some other companies, but never did a client meeting
Yeah.
over Zoom.
So my
But it
boss,
just switched.
my previous boss had implemented Teams, I kid you not, about 4 weeks before COVID. And the chief of staff and the chief operation officer equivalent was like, "Oh, what is this new extra tool? We've never email a file." And there was the most smug moment of, "Hey, I told you so." I told you this would be useful for our organization. I mean,
It was
literally,
the same.
the fact that we'd implemented Teams and got the guys familiar on it, it was just a lifesaver. And it was
I
4 weeks.
think we were the same,
4
but
weeks.
about 9 months maybe. Like, I think we'd installed it like 9 months, we switched over to Teams. And they did, at first we're just like, "Oh, so this is Microsoft's version of Slack." So it's like Slack, but not as good. But to Microsoft's credit, they rolled out so many good improvements to Teams quickly during that, and it was a lifesaver because it was different than just Slack because it had the video component baked in. It had all of our files are right there. Like, we just switched. And so many people have talked about this since the pandemic time, but when you think about innovation and change, our ability to have just switched, I mean, obviously that pulled so much forward, stuff that probably would have eventually happened, but
Mm.
who knows without the pandemic whether we would be in the
Yeah.
same remote
Well,
space.
that's a great segue onto, I guess, innovating in a time of crisis, right? Because there was no opportunity to push back, right? In a case like that, I mean,
Yeah,
you just had to go, and you had to go with the tools
totally.
that were available, and therefore innovation happened out of necessity. And how do you, I said, I've thrown it out there as a facilitator, and this kind of comes back to the speed, right? Humans, when you're under a bit of time pressure and there is a deadline, whether that's a false deadline or not, there's almost that element of crisis, right? So does that support the kind of speed element of coming back to the start of the conversation? But do you think as a facilitator you can kind of I guess falsely engineer a degree of crisis or speed in order to try and enhance the innovation potential or creativity potential of a session?
Yeah, I do think you can. It's actually pretty easy to do within the context of a workshop, right? Where you're giving them a hypothetical and also just the nature of using a timer. I've done workshops where I've had teams that did not even consider themselves digitally sophisticated build out a working prototype of a mobile app in 90 minutes. Like, they didn't even know what the idea was. So the first part is just thinking of a cool idea, like what's a some interesting friction point where we could add value? How could we combine data sources in interesting ways? Cool. What does that look like? And then I assume it's still around. This was a while ago, but there's like a mobile app called Prototype on Paper. We would just ask people to draw it. Literally, you would take pictures with your phone and you add hotspots and you link it to other pages. And they had a working prototype. And it is mind blowing when they realize we just put together a working prototype in 90 minutes. And how long would that have taken them if left to their own devices? A year? I mean,
Yeah.
it would have been months at the very least, but they would have talked it to death. And so, but that's in a hypothetical situation, like to create the real stakes like we got with COVID. I think the closest I can think of is when the leadership team simply says, "This is happening." Like, then you actually have you've got that same sense of, okay, now we just have to deal with it. Now we just have to
Yeah.
innovate.
Yeah.
And interesting to go way, way back, because this is the biggest one I can think of, is Chiat Day, the agency that I started my career at. And this was in the late 90s. It was a famous thing. It was so far ahead of its time and so forced upon people, but reprogrammed the thought behavior. They created what they called the virtual office. This was in the 90s, keeping in mind the internet barely existed. Like, we did at this point we had file servers, we could keep our stuff online and everything. But the whole point was nobody has a desk anymore. You're going to come in. We didn't even have mobile phones. I had a pager, and you could get a cordless phone, and then you could program that cordless phone to your extension so it would ring through wherever you decided to sit. And they really wanted to ban paper. That part didn't work so well. People would just print stuff out, and then we'd have to throw it away. They got rid of filing cabinets, so you'd have to throw the paper away and then print it out the next day. I think that part backfired. Humans
Uh,
and change. But it just was like the group had to work this way. But I think interestingly is anybody who had been part of that culture during that time, it did revert back. There was a point, I think about 99, where we moved to a new office build. No, maybe 98. We moved to a new building and then ditched the virtual office concept because it was providing friction. It was it was how we work today. It was just
mm.
like way 3 decades ahead of its time.
the start,
vision.
didn't you? About there's a balance between being too early and the
Yeah.
wider system just not being ready for it,
Yeah.
versus being too late, and in this case, not being able to function because of COVID, because it just will slam down in front of you. If you were
Right. You just had to
too late.
switch. Yeah.
No,
But
yeah,
and even something like Teams, like Mumble Grumble or whatever. And if you asked everybody, do you want to switch to Teams? No, we don't. We need another thing. Anytime somebody adds one more thing, did we need Teams? Yes, we needed it in the end.
mm,
And it was good that we adapted early.
That's the thing though, right? Because like in the end, and you say people like change that they like, but you never know that from the outset. So I
Mhm.
suppose the question here is humans are naturally lazy, and status quo is, people say status quo is status quo for a reason, which, large in part is true. But another reason for that is just natural complacency, right? So
Yeah.
I suppose my question is twofold, because first of all is, how do you get teams to desire change? And the second one is, I suppose you've got half the equation solved there, because by virtue of the fact that you're there in front of them means someone in the chain of command wants change, right? But then I suppose the even bigger question is, how do you convince the people that they need change in the first place? Because again, it's like no one likes change from the outset. It's only in retrospect, really, that
Yeah.
the virtues are seen.
I think so what's interesting is the work I did with Hyper Island for nearly a decade. We sold it off the idea that it's to help company, and I explained it earlier, of helping companies become more digital. That wasn't really what we did. We helped people adapt to change. That's fundamentally Hyper Island still exists, by the way. It's a school primarily in Sweden, and the genius of the school is they teach the students not how to do whatever it is you need to do now, but how to learn whatever is coming faster than anybody else can. That's essentially what Hyper Island does, I think. So that's what we did for 10 years. I did workshops where I was trying to help people navigate change who didn't want to do change. And the best way, I don't know if there's a way to get them to want to do it, but you have to make it in their best interests. So it's basic economics. What incentives can we put in place? And so if you are somebody who wants a future and you want a career and you're ambitious, change by necessity is part of that. I don't think you're likely to have anybody out there who is going to be radically successful not embracing change in some form or fashion. Like, I can think of one friend who is an art director, brilliant art director, but he never really wanted to learn like the design tools. He always liked directing other people on how to do it. That was how he had come up. And so he did not embrace that change. But the change he did embrace was he moved into real estate investing at a really particularly good time and then made a fortune doing that. So he got out of being an art director and he made a fortune in real estate investing. Well, that's change. That was just a different change than the change I was talking about, and I think whatever that is, it's going to be there. There will always be less ambitious, less motivated people who just want to do their job and get it done. And sometimes we need those people in companies. You're still going to need them to adapt when you roll out a new collaboration platform, or when you change the SOPs or something about the system. But I think it makes it easier on them to say, here's the new ones, just follow this. I'm like, okay, cool. They just don't have to think about it. They don't want to you know, get upended. But it really has to be aligned with where they're going. And another thing that I'm pretty sure I stole this quote from my friend Mark as well. He's great at these little sound bites, but I said it a lot. So I may have changed some of the words in it. But basically, when people tend to complain about change, kind of like I did earlier, well, I don't have time to keep up with it. Like the new stuff that just came out. I mean, Google I/O just had their whole conference and they released like 6 new tools, and then there are like 10 others. Now video looks like real. Video just looks real now with people talking and stuff, and it's flooded with TikTok. All that changed 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. This isn't old yet. And I want to play with it. I want to sit down and play with it and figure out how it works, but I don't have time, all that sort of stuff. But if you totally ignore it, if you say, I don't have time to deal with any of this stuff, this is the soundbite. If you say you don't have time now, pretty soon you'll have nothing but time, because you will be, if you're not going to keep up with the change now, you're going to be left behind. You will be out of work, and then you'll be desperately trying to figure out how to stay up with it.
Yeah. And what does the future workplace look like for you, assuming that AI continues to solve a lot of the immediate problems and things that do consume a lot of time in the day-to-day work experience?
I think it's very hard to predict future, right? Like we can only see about a year or two into the future here. In the short term, I think it is going to be very disruptive because to be able to do exactly what we did before, we will be able to do it with fewer people. And so what we will see in the short term is less jobs. This is what people are ringing the bells going up, there's not going to be jobs here, blah, blah, blah. But we have this tendency then to expand, but whatever that rule is, like time expands to the time, or whatever task expands to the time allotted, or the gas expands to fill the space. There's sort of like this law of nature that things expand. Well, to do the same with the same, or to do the same as what we're doing now, the same output we can do with fewer people. But with the same amount of people, we could have more output. And I think people are going to realize that. So, which is why I believe the future belongs to the fast. I think speed is going to increasingly become a competitive advantage. If you treat it the way that the economy and change and all things, competition, the way all of that ran in the past was at a speed that we could waste a lot of time in meetings and through poor communication and figuring stuff out as we went. We could waste that time and still be competitive. In the future, that won't be the case. The competition will run circles around you if you can't adapt and pivot and figure things out quickly. And that's still going to be people. That isn't going to make those decisions for us. They could advise, they can research, all that stuff is faster. So tasks will be massively increased. I think the leaders of the future are going to be the ones who can think strategically about stuff. They can see everything that comes in and make connections in new, creative, interesting ways. That's going to be beneficial. The people that can just do stuff, well, AI can just do stuff better. So that's going to have to be a shift most people will have to figure out how to make. I think it's going to ultimately be a net good thing. Like you'll either need it to be something that you need a human being to do, though I could see a day where we've got AI powered robots that can do anything you need a physical human to
Mm.
do, including serving burgers and stuff like that. But we're also I'm riffing off of this because I'm just making up the answer as you say it, but like, yes, a robot could make my hamburger and feed it to me. And when the first robot does that, that might be a novelty that I think is interesting. But when everybody's doing that, we might prefer to go to the one with the human person, and therefore humans win. And then it's kind of like vinyl versus MP3. Like
Mm.
objectively, MP3 is a much better, more modern format. It's light. I can have 8,000. I have literally every song ever on my phone right now, whereas I could have the biggest vinyl collection in the world and I wouldn't come to a fraction of that. But people still prefer vinyl in certain cases.
Mm.
We're always going to have that.
Yeah.
So I don't think there'll ever be this place where it's completely upended. I also think we're going to eventually see more of a fractured approach to this in-person hybrid or virtual discussion that we
Mm.
still haven't really cracked right now. Right now, it's kind of like, all right, well, we need people to be in the office 2 or 3 days a week. That's how we do it. I think some people are going to prefer a culture where people are in person, and some people are going to prefer a remote culture. And a hybrid culture, it's okay, I guess. I think it comes with more problems than it comes with benefits when you go hybrid. It's like pick one or the other. Some people will see a benefit in it. And I think you'll be able to say, hey, the benefit of us in person is you're going to get mentorship. We're going to know you're here. You're going to have better opportunities for advancement, all that sort of stuff. We have free food in the office. You get culture. We have fun. Like you're going to enjoy work better than you are sitting in your bedroom
Mm.
doing this. And other people are going to be like, nope, I don't want that. I just want to be able to work virtually. And those companies are going to reap the benefits of not having to pay for overhead or a business. It's a hybrid where they're paying for the overhead of a business and nobody's there. That feels like a stupid
Yeah,
case.
yeah. So I saw an interesting post the other day about coming back to your point about the human served burger. I'd like to kind of run this through as an example a bit more. Um, given that let's say like 95% of the restaurants are AI served because that's just the most economical model and most people will go for that. But yet you almost have the Michelin star restaurant becomes the human one, which is kind of then the human touch becomes the valuable thing. And then obviously that's only going to be the kind of elite burger servers that will be that 5% of that's actually commercially worth having a
Yeah.
human burger server. So your traditional burger server, then it has no place in that world either. I thought that was a really interesting post about kind of, I don't know, turning humanity into a rare commodity that only the elite can afford. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
It'll be interesting. I don't know whether it'll be only elite, because I would think there'd still be a way to counter program. I suppose, again, it depends on the economics of it. If literally you couldn't afford to have human beings. But my family and I were in Japan about 2 months ago for vacation. And Japan is always an interesting place just to observe, like, a glimpse of what the future might look like, or
I'd
just
love
such
to
a
go.
different thing. And one of the things that I was struck by, we have them here, but it was like everywhere in Japan, was like when you went into a fast food place, you ordered by kiosk. And especially as Americans in Japan, where I actually do speak Japanese a little bit, but I go very, very slowly. Like me going through a menu is slow. And but you can just switch it to English and order and get it exactly how you want. For my kids, we could get all the no ketchup and no onions on the burgers. They could order just the way they want, and they pay. And then a real person gave it to us. And we have that, like McDonald's has that here, although I don't see it that often. Like, I see it at some McDonald's in some places, whereas there was everywhere we went was like that. And then even the Michelin starred, like, we went to a Michelin starred udon place. There's a lot of, like, little hole in the wall places in Japan that are like that. Like, here in America anyway, usually if it's Michelin starred, it's pretty amazing, though there's some smaller ones. But we just walked by and then we walked in. It was like 2 people working there, the chef and, like, maybe somebody doing dishes or something like that, but you ordered not off of a fancy kiosk. It was actually like this really old-fashioned vending machine type thing that you paid for it via the vending machine. It gave you a ticket. It, like, spit out a ticket, and then you went and gave the ticket to the chef, and then he gave you the thing, and then when you were done, you put the dishes back, and we loved it. And I think that sort of thing would be huge here. Somebody rolled out restaurants that worked that way here in the United States, but
I thought you were about to say, like, the real human touch there was you actually wash your own dishes and put them back in the shelves and that's how they came.
they just
Maybe
have
that
us do
level of
everything. It
humanity.
was so
Like,
human.
yeah, I mean, maybe that's it. Maybe we just cracked it at a restaurant where you literally do everything. You may as well cook the food yourself.
But you know what is funny is I just saw, I think I got a TikTok video like yesterday about, it's a behavioral economics thing that I guess they call the IKEA effect, which is that if you've built something yourself, if you put the work in yourself, you value that. You actually want to pay more. I don't know if it's when you want to pay more money or you just valued it more. I forget how it went, but you value the experience more because you had skin in the game. And that there's lots of potential ways to do that. But like doing your own dishes, or when you go to Korean barbecue, for instance, you cook the food. So it somehow
Yep.
feels, and you pay a premium to go to this place where they just give you the food and then you cook it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's a funny
The number of
thing.
complaints dropped significantly in those restaurants.
Yeah. But how interesting would it be that you could just take it and wash the dishes yourself? But they've got a system to make that easy. That might be an interesting, and you can't pay until you've left.
Yeah. Until the AI has signed off on it.
I know.
The one thing that I think underpins a lot of this, and I'm going to come back to your points about change and culture and having an environment where you can experiment. And a huge part of those experiments is an acceptable an anticipation and an acceptance of failure. Now, what
Yeah.
sort of organizations and what are the best kind of organizations or the kind of companies that you've worked with that really get risk right with experimenters mindset and creating a culture where people are okay with failing, but not to the point where it damages the company and that actually I'm even if I'm a junior, let's extrapolate the AI model where I have time in work to try new things, plus a culture of failure. Like how many times can I fail before the people are going to start to
Yeah.
say, well, you're going to need to produce something good?
It's an interesting thing because I do think that acceptance of failure is a requirement, not just for speed, honestly, but for navigating the world today. I think we do ourselves a lot of damage by creating this situation where somebody's going to get yelled at or demoted or see their future prospects reduced if whatever horse they've bet on or whatever project they're running or whatever thing that they said was a good idea doesn't work out. In practice, I've seen it in pockets within companies, but I cannot say that I've seen it in action in many big companies ever, including some that are sort of famous for it, like the FANG type companies. When I have worked with them, I did not sense this campaign we're working on. It's okay if we learn from failure as we go. No, it had to work. And so I still saw that there. So it might be there, but it's in pockets. Where I've ever seen it is in smaller organizations like ourselves. We're small enough that, and you have to give yourself some grace. Like, I'm going to try it. And even then, it's still hard.
Mhm.
If I've spent a lot of time on something and it doesn't work out, I feel bad about it. And I don't think acceptance of failure means not feeling bad. The point is just reframing it to make it a learning experience. And as long as you realize that that's the case, you can get up and try again. There is, to what you said, the realistic aspect of how many times can you fail before you succeed. The way I've talked about this with my friends, I've got a lot of friends who have their own companies now, and I do think that's a big part of the workplace future, by the way, too, is I think we're going to see more small companies. But it's very difficult early days to get it successful and get any client at all. And then you get some clients, but you want more clients. And then when you have more clients, you want to scale. There's always something you want to move on to. And it can always feel like it's not going fast enough for yourself. And the more devilish side of that isn't that it isn't going fast enough. It's that fear that it might never happen. And because it hasn't happened yet. So you failed and you failed and you failed and it hasn't happened yet. Like, I haven't had a $500,000 year. I haven't had $1 million year. Am I stupid for thinking that? And at the beginning, I haven't had a client yet. Am I ever going to have a
Right.
client? Like, there's truth to that. And somewhere I heard it explained this way, and it was my favorite version. And I still have to remind myself of it. But it's basically like, if you were going to play a game where you could win $1 million and all you had to do was roll double sixes. That's all you have to do is take 2 dice and roll double sixes. The odds of rolling double six on your first try are slim. Probably on your second try. It might take 15 tries before you roll a double six. You just have to keep rolling. And ideally, you want to roll them fast. Like, if you roll them and then you waited 3 months to roll it again, it's going to take you a while before you'll win your $1 million. But if you just kept trying really quickly, you would eventually do it. And I like that because rolling double sixes eventually is actually a mathematical certainty. It will for sure happen eventually. You just can't predict statistically when along this line, but it's a mathematical certainty that it will happen. And I think that's the same, more or less, with running a business or solving any problem within a business. If you work for a large company, you will have success. It's a matter of how many failures do you have on your way to that success. And is it going to be 1 or 3 or none or 15 before you get there? What that metaphor doesn't take into account, you have to like, if the reality of it was I had to pay $50,000 every time I rolled those dice, now realistically, I mean, theoretically, if I was still just trying to get to $1 million, I could roll quite a few times at $50,000. But there will be a point where you run out of time and money or resources to achieve that same goal. So you have to think about that part too. But essentially, if you want to succeed, all you have to do is be able to shrink how much it costs you to roll those dice. And so that is pretty doable when you run a low overhead, low number of people, low headcount kind of
Mm.
kind of because now it doesn't cost you so much to get back out there. If the way you're testing it is you're going to run an expensive ad campaign, well, you're spending money to do that. If the way you're testing it is reaching out to 100 people that you know and asking what they think of it, I can test that pretty quickly. That's kind of how you go through and do that. And so all of that, it runs the same way, just at different sizes, I suppose, within a company. Am I giving the group the freedom to fail? And how long of a leash do we do that? And how much have you shrunken that failure? So to say that a company should embrace failure in terms of moving forward is great. But if you're Nike and we're like, you know what, let's just embrace failure. So next time you launch this giant shoe or whatever this line, Just if it doesn't, well, that's no big deal. We'll just embrace failure. That's not something they or shareholders or anybody wants to hear. But how do you
Mm.
shrink that? There's lots of ways these days to try something new, to roll out something in a test market. I mean, this is what, in theory, actually, I mean, some companies are very good about it, even if it's not built into their culture. A McDonald's, say, or any fast food, they routinely launch new menu items and take menu items off or try pricing differences or whatever,
Mm.
and they just do it in Dallas. And so the rest of the world doesn't know it happened. And so
Yeah.
whether it's a failure or not, it doesn't really matter. It wasn't a failure, it was a test. And if you look at it really as an experiment or a test, that's the better angle. Sorry, it took
Yeah.
me so long to loop back to that truth, but that's the case. If you really just look at it as an experiment, there is no failure. There's just learning, and that's really the
Yeah.
right way to do it. But you have to do it small in order to
Well,
make
that's
that
kind of
culturally acceptable.
coming back to what we do. I mean, like that's so much of that is true because what we're trying to do is trying to help people get from A to B, but there may be multiple ways to do that. And as long as the way that they're trying is measurable, it has an intended learning outcome, is a prototype in itself, and if it
Yeah,
doesn't work, you disregard it and you double down on what does. Or I think for us, it comes back to the point about strategy, right? It's about having that
yeah,
strategic approach to how you use your time. And I always say this, what it rolls off the tongue now, but you need to have an experimenter's mindset, and you need to dedicate time, energy, and resources into turning ideas into action. But that needs to be
yeah,
done in a very, very precious way, so that you're maximizing your precious time and resources because they're always limited and finite.
yeah.
And I think that's another huge part to what we're trying to do as facilitators of practical innovation. It's probably a neater way of saying all that.
And I think, looping back to the idea of the five facets of fast and how you systematize things as well as creating that culture of facilitation. Because if part of the system is that 6 times a year we're going to launch experiments around these things, whatever it is, whatever you've defined, now it's up, it's February, time to launch an experiment. Let's do a quick facilitated exploration of what the experiment's going to be. How are we going to define success? How are we going to measure it? Let's get creative. Let's figure out, cool, we did that. Let's launch it. And then we look at that experiment and we document it. And then if it was a radical success, then you go, how might we scale this up? And that becomes the next thing. If it was a giant failure, well, we learn from that. Next one's going to come up in 2 months. It becomes systematized. If it's not systematized, it is actually isn't an experiment. It's actually oh, I have this idea, and then I guess I'll just I'll position it as an experiment. But just like you have to remember after the fact that that's how you wanted to do it, or it's like
Mm-hmm.
you say after it failed that it was just an experiment. Like if you don't really have the structure for it, you're not going to do it often enough, or build it into the culture. And that's where it just works so well. I think when you it works when you think to do it, and it is part of the mindset, it's part of the system, it's part of, the ability to deliver on that, all of those kinds of things. And I agree with what you said that facilitation and innovation go hand in hand because I've often said we have titles. My title at the agency was the chief marketing and innovation officer, which sort of shoved two things together. But you can't do innovation. I joked earlier, like I said, I was in charge of nothing because you can't really be in charge of innovation. You can only facilitate innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Like innovation isn't an output the same way within an agency that media is, or creative is, or strategy is, or even like those disciplines do something isolated that has one output. Innovation straddles every potential thing as all the way to like accounting, theoretically.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could
Mm-hmm.
innovate around how we do our
Yeah.
billing or what the business model is or whatever. And so you can't really do it because you need the rest of the group. You need their input, you need their brains and their brilliance and their expertise, and you need their ideas, and you need them to implement it. It's actually all about them,
Mm-hmm.
like as an individual. So it is all about facilitation. And I think that's something that's missing a lot. People misdefine that role of innovation, especially when there's somebody with that name a lot. Not always. I also know a lot of
Mm-hmm.
groups that focus on innovation, and facilitation is a big part of what they do.
So I think
Some
it's
do it
interesting that
right.
like your place grouped innovation with marketing, but in most cases I see innovations grouped with tech. right? It's like innovation equals technology. And if one thing this conversation has told me, that we spent more time talking about human beings, culture, and leadership. And I'm a firm believer that innovation is closer tied to those things, and technology and marketing and whatever kind of other subsector that falls under that is just a wider part of innovation as a system. So it's interesting for us because we had it on the pre-call. We had this discussion about innovation is a really hard thing to pin down. It can be so easily seen as just a corporate buzzword, or turning up to an innovation day. I'm booking a corporate table and putting 10 staff and giving them the day off work to go and do innovation doesn't mean that you're an innovative company, right? That's just the first part, right? It's that you've committed something to it. But for me, it's all about the action and the culture. What's been your most difficult workshop or facilitator experience, and how did you get through that?
I don't know if I've got one giant horror story. I'm going to also, because I don't ever want people to recognize themselves in it, but I will. This is something that's on my mind lately, is that a lot of the time when we talk, even when I started the company, I started around helping get to ideas faster and applying creativity. And I think I have had a lot of success over my career applying facilitation to creativity and how and speed to ideas, because a lot of times creative people push back against that and they feel like, "Oh, I don't want to rush ideas. It's actually all about taking our time," which is great in theory, but when you think about it through an economic lens, if company A can get to a great idea in 3 days and company B needs 3 weeks or 3 months to get there, company A wins. So it doesn't really matter how you feel about the amount of time you think you need to get to a great idea. So ideation is something that I was really focused on. I have had several workshops where we go in and we've got this great structure to come up with, like, solving this challenge. And what happens when the group is not good at coming up with good ideas? and and that is an interesting challenge, because some groups are better at it than others. Some groups just solve it really quickly, and others are just, I mean, they will say stuff that doesn't even make sense. And they are often quite senior and stuff like that. And so I've had a few workshops where then, like, I had one that was like a 2-day workshop where it became pretty obvious at the end of the first day that the ideas were not where we expected them to be at the end of the first day. And then you have to go back and rethink the approach. And what it took me from, as with anything, a failure, I look at it as a failure on my part, not their part. Like, I'm not going to blame them for being bad at coming up with ideas. I was just used to a group being better at coming up with ideas than they were. You have to build it into the process. And I was reminded, actually, that the creative process in general, even with professional creative people, professional copywriters and art directors, whatever, the process is still the same. We don't tell them what the answer is and they come back the next day with great ideas. It does not happen that way. It is, we have 100 bad ideas to get to one good idea. That's the process. So, and there's a learning component to it. So it isn't even that 100 ideas were bad. Maybe 70 of them were bad. 30 of them were good, but not right for reasons we didn't realize until we started discussing them. And then you learn that and you add that to our collective knowledge, and then you need to go back. And so I think what I've just learned, and I still need to be a bit more conscious of it, because I tend to want to structure, I want to accomplish a lot. And so I want to solve this problem and then move to the next thing, which is let's start building or whatever we're going to do with the idea we just had. You actually need a few more rounds built in where we come up with ideas, we feedback on what doesn't work and where they need to be better, and then the group moves forward within that thinking. I am used to jumping to the second or third level of that because I've done it often enough that I know what those problems were, but the group didn't know that. The group didn't realize, we didn't really articulate that clearly, or we didn't articulate it in a way that was catchy, or whatever thing the group will think of. So that probably, I don't know if that is exactly what you're going for with your question, but that was probably been my most frustrating ones were like that. And I just think it's about learning and building a different approach for certain groups that are not built that way.
Yeah.
to
And
still come up
in
with.
those moments, because I mean, this is always my dilemma as an engineer and as a guy who loves solving problems. One of my biggest jars as a facilitator is not getting involved and trying to help. Like you said, it's that kind of they need to arrive at the solution so that when it comes to delivering it, they understand why it was why
Yeah.
otherwise it may have just been given to them top down and just say go and do it. So it's as a facilitator, I find it I love getting involved in sessions and occasionally I kind of say, oh, like we could do this, like as if I'm part of a team. And I often find that participants like that because they're like, oh, you're properly invested in this and you love it. But then it's also your job is not to it's not to provide the answer to them. Otherwise, you're just a traditional consultant coming in and saying, hey, from my experience, you should do this and go in and do it.
Yeah. And that part is challenging. I think especially in the instances I'm thinking of that I was just describing, I definitely started jumping in with ideas because it's like, I can see 15 great ideas here, and they're just better versions of what you already put on the wall, but you have to like bite your tongue. But at the same time, as a facilitator, I felt like I was failing them because they weren't coming up with the ideas. And so
Mm.
that's why when you don't know what to do to handle that, you have to be very, very confident. You also have to have the time built in. That's its own challenge. And to be able to do it correctly. And in some cases, another challenge that we have as facilitators where you're working for a client, sometimes you're just brought in, they let you just solve it the way you need to solve it. But sometimes they want to have co-created it with you. And then they get very worried about the timing and when are we moving on to the next thing and all that. And as a facilitator, I know the group needs to spend another 2 hours doing this, even though I was planning on going to
But
this.
it comes
And
back to that point earlier about slowing it down. You've got to know as a
yeah,
facilitator when to strategically slow it down
yeah.
because there's something that hasn't quite evolved to go to the next step yet.
And you need
Actually,
your
I
clients
like
to be able
that
to do
feeling
that.
because it we always say, get comfortable spending time with your pains and challenges because again, it comes back to this human nature. We have a
Yeah,
tendency to rush to conclusions and we want to escape those uncomfortable difficult conversations or if there's a little bit of friction because innovation thrives on friction and sometimes you just got to force them in that little bit of uncomfortableness just to
yeah,
maybe it's that crisis, maybe it's that coming back to that point about simulating crisis. People want to get out of there but they can't because you're holding them there. I don't know.
yeah. I mean, going back to what you said too about like how do you do that? I had a project, a client project, this is just about 2 weeks ago, where very specifically the CEO who brought me in for this wanted both sides of what I was doing. So, or I should say, both sides of my brain. What I offer is facilitation, but he also wanted my experience marketing a large successful advertising agency over a decade and what I knew about pitching new business and putting presentations together and positioning the company and my marketing background. He wanted both sides of that, right? He wanted the group to feel like they owned it, but he also wanted me to be able to raise the bar there. And so I had to go in that case kind of with two different hats on and just be very deliberate about when I was switching hats. And I would say that out loud. This is something I learned from Jonathan and Rebecca Courtney at AJ and Smart. I think probably Jonathan said it, but Rebecca's the one who told me, so I give her credit for it. They are facilitation trainers at facilitator.com, and I work with them fractionally, actually with corporate clients only is the part that I work with them on. And we were working with a big client up in San Francisco a few months ago when this came up. Like sometimes, especially when you're teaching people facilitation internally, well, they aren't agnostic. They can't take themselves out of this. They have skin in the game and they have
Mhm.
opinions because of their role. Even that mid-level person I talked about earlier. Sometimes, so what they do is literally say, okay, for a second, let me take off my independent facilitator hat and I'm going to put on my opinionated marketer hat for a second. And now let me share this. And just by being clear about that switch, that code switching, I guess, of what role am I playing right now, you're reminding the participants that generally I don't want to do this, but I'm doing it now because you've asked and I have something to share. But now let me go back to an agnostic thing where I'm not going to insert my opinion. I want it to come from you and you to
Mm.
explore it. And we did that within Hyper Island as well, where facilitation was kind of the approach we used, but I was also what we call a speaker in that I had opinions, I had experience to share. We just sort of switched. It's like, now let me share my experience, my opinion, and that's kind of inspiration for you. And now I'm going to switch to a facilitation point of view where you're going to work on figuring out what everything I just said, what parts do you care about? What parts do you want to throw out? What parts do you want to remix and make it your own? And now you go do that. And that I think is a great way of doing it because that's how we learn. I go hear about stuff from 18 different places and then remix it myself for my own situation, as would you and anybody else, quite frankly. So I forgot how we even got on that topic, but I think that's a good way to balance that, like biting our tongue. Like I have experience to share that's going to be valuable for the group. You just somehow have to literally take off the hat and switch onto a different hat for a second and be able to
Yeah.
share it. But the more intentional we are about that, that works better than blurring the lines than just being a facilitator who starts shoving your own ideas into the situation.
I think another aspect of that is, yes, while you might have experience in that ground, it might also be good to not have experience, right? And ask the kind of dumb questions, because whilst you don't want to lead the group in a certain direction, it's definitely important to prod on kind of.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing because I think generally any good facilitator can work within that. I will say I've got a client project going on right now where it's for an advisory board within an industry that I am not familiar with. And I do suffer from feeling dumb in the room, if that makes sense. Like you're like, okay, so they're using a bunch of acronyms that I don't know what the acronyms are. And you have to have a lot of confidence as a facilitator to say, all right, I know all of you know what that acronym means, but could you re-explain that to me? What does that mean? And just asking a question of like, hey, this might be a dumb agnostic or a question or ignorant question is probably the best way to say it. This may be an ignorant question, but how does this mean? And it does force them. There is a benefit to what you're saying, Alex, about not having that background because we will ask questions that force them to defend their faith a little bit in the way things are, the way they say they are. Like, is that really true? Or is that just like, is that something ripe for disruption, what you just said? Because it
Or,
seems,
or is it something that they've just, it is the default line and they're saying it without even thinking? And the fact that they've got to reframe it for someone who doesn't understand what the default is or the
yeah,
norm or the status quo, I
yeah,
think will help them unlock their brain and reframe a problem and unlock a degree of creativity in a kind of subsequent round of analysis, or maybe trying to reframe the question for you might unlock it for someone else. I love
yeah,
Simon Sinek. He talks about being an idiot in the room and being employed to just go and sit on board meetings and ask stupid questions and be, and, and be
yeah,
like, what does that acronym stand for? And actually, most people in the room don't know, but they just know what it means because they're aware of it in the context that it's normally used. But no one's ever had the courage to speak up because it makes them look stupid in their peer group. I think it's a
right.
hugely important part of authentic facilitation. And I always offer our clients the opportunity for me to bring in a wild card as a participant, and that's someone in our network that I think would vibe with the client. And obviously, it's a kind of
Mm.
it's a voluntary choice because some people don't like airing their dirty laundry in front of someone that they're not familiar with, and some people just say, yeah, do you know what, that'd be fantastic. And I always guarantee the wild card adds value to the session.
It requires a lot of confidence to be the one to ask those questions. Like you have to, Simon Sinek can do that because he makes a gazillion dollars off of his book and speaking fees. Like he's got that
Yeah.
confidence. That becomes so much harder, say, for that mid-level manager leader that we talked about earlier that does not want to feel foolish in front of somebody else, or and yet still might not be able to actually actively keep up with the conversation, not because they're not intelligent, just because they're using terms and words and context that they didn't know about. And I certainly, I think I'm pretty good at it, but maybe the better way to say is I think I fake it fine in the room, but I don't like the way it makes me feel when I
Mm.
can't keep up with the conversation. And
Yeah.
that's its own challenge.
Do you ever feel like the session's getting ahead of you? Like they're almost ready to move on, but you're like, I don't know whether I can take them there because I've got that experience. You think
Yeah.
back to like, intuitively when to slow the group down, but in those moments, you might not have that same instinct. And therefore you might feel like the session's getting away from you.
Yeah. Cause I'm still trying to keep up with like what they talked about and what it means. And certainly,
It's a fine line because a lot of the time you have, as you say, the dogmatic guys or the senior leadership or the hippos, the highest paid
yes.
person's opinions. to which the group automatically will conform to whatever the consensus is, which makes you think that everyone is on the same page. But in reality, there's power dynamics or other things in play. So you kind of do
Yeah.
have to rein them back in and say, hey guys, what is the underlying here?
Well, and what I love about facilitation, and certainly the way that I like to apply it, is you use tools and processes that get rid of that groupthink dynamic, and certainly the hippo dynamic of or whoever talks first. Because anytime a group starts, and we have this on the advisory board that I was just mentioning, for instance, it's not a big group, but no matter what, if somebody starts off talking about something, somehow magically that becomes the dominant subject for the entire group, the rest, because it's where we started. And I don't think there's the same dynamics of like a highest paid person in that instance, but there is whoever talked first.
And
And
there's a
there
degree
is
of social etiquette to that as well, because you can't,
right.
it's the laws of conversation. You can't just go and pivot straight into something else, because that wouldn't be right as human beings.
You're exactly right. And so if we're having this conversation, the first thing Alex brings up is how, facilitation helps you move fast. You picked my topic. We're not going to go, well, actually, the benefit of facilitation is that you get equal voices voiced. Like, we're going to keep talking about speed for a while because Alex brought it up first. Whereas if you give everybody the chance to think about what's important to them and potentially get all of it on the wall so that you see all the topics that we need to get to, you realize speed is just going to be one of 25 topics that this group wants to discuss. Or you make sure that everybody goes and shares out what is interesting. Like, we as facilitators we can minimize the impact that happens, but in a polite way that group cannot do on their own without being assholes and cutting off other people. And that's important too.
So we have something in our sessions which I think tackles that really nicely. Is that throughout each phase of the workshop, we just have a very visual parking lot that, as a facilitator, I could just say, look, guys, that's great, that's worthy
Yeah.
of time, but in the spirit of getting from A to B and the time that we've got allocation, I'm going to park that, and if we have time at the end, which I know we never do, we're going to bring that up.
But it's heard.
And it's heard, it's acknowledged, it's been placed in a designated space, so it hasn't been palmed off and ignored. I think for me, that's how we deal with that in quite an effective way, and you're literally parking the idea for later.
Yeah. That's a very effective tool, and a big fan of the parking lot.
So next question for you. So sorry to jump in there, but yeah, next question for you, Tim, is like, everyone talks about good ideas all day, and we've been guilty of it with our clients. I'm sure you've had a couple where, you can get a synopsis on the board and a very clear roadmap, and everyone's happy. But by the end of it, how do you bridge the gap between talk and implementation and actually following through on all these things that have been conjured up?
Well, within the context of the workshop itself, is that what you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So usually it's been built in, and it depends on the objectives of the workshop. Another thing too is I do think sometimes, depending on who you're talking to, people think of workshop and define it the same way. But in fact, I think there's 4 different types of workshops, and sometimes the point of the workshop is learning. Sometimes it's like soft outcomes like team building and stuff like that. Like the point is the journey, not the destination. Sometimes it's a hard outcome, like we want to make a decision and we need an action plan. And sometimes the point was to explore a topic. Like, you use a SWOT analysis is kind of my go-to example that lots of people do, that is a very simple workshop type thing that corporations are used to doing. There isn't really an output to a SWOT analysis. It's to help explore it so you have a better understanding of the big picture to help you make other decisions later. So the type you're talking about is a hard outcome driven type of workshop, right? We want to come up with an idea, an initiative that we're going to run an experiment around, say, and then we want to move forward. Well, now you're just within the context of the workshop. I'm always going to call it a workshop if facilitation is involved, even if you're doing it internally. I still call it a workshop. How facilitated experience, whatever that is going to be, you need to leave room to have decided on the idea and then figure out how you're going to take your next steps on it. And we do have a bad tendency to shrink that to like an hour discussion where it requires a lot more. But there are a lot of facilitated ways to go to think through what those next steps look like that provide a very clear roadmap going forward. So what I often like to do, it's very much like you go through an ideation around what the ideas are going to be in the first place, and then you pull into what the idea is, and now we go into an ideation of what is going to be needed to make that happen. And again, if you got a group with 10 to 20 or however many people that are there, you're going to get a statistically significant part of that covered, because I will think of 30%, you'll think of 30%, and a lot of ours will overlap in terms of what's needed, but we'll mostly have a pretty clear idea of what needed to be thought through. Well, we need to get legal's input on this, or we need to do this. We have to have a script written, or whatever that is going to be. And then you start to literally build that out action plan. And I really I always like to time box it so that we're thinking about what is going to happen tomorrow. Like, what if it's too big? It feels like we made a decision, but we didn't really know what to do with it next. So then you need to have a meeting to talk about what to do with it next. You actually need to have very clear what is happening tomorrow. Like, what is going to be different? What are you doing? Who's responsible for that? And I'm a big fan of saying, and who's like, if Alex says, "Oh, I'm responsible for doing that," great. Now, who's responsible for making sure that Alex actually does that? It's just like one more degree of, it's
Yeah.
pretty simple, but if we know that Dan is the one that has to follow up with Alex, all you have to do is check in with Alex, and then all Alex has to do is do whatever you said you were going to do. Easy. And whatever that looks like, I've had a lot of success with that. It gets blurrier, as any action plan does, as you get further away, because it depends on what's decided in the early stages. So it's much more important about just clarity on what are we building, what is that going to look like, and what is the very next step that needs to happen, and who's doing it, so that it's almost just like, oh yeah, all I literally have to do is go write this email or do this thing, and we know exactly what that looks like. So that tends to be the way I structure it. It really depends on what the outcome looks like. In some cases, if you're prototyping something, then you're going to prototype it in the workshop. That's the next stage, but it depends on whether that's the output you would need.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. I'm a huge fan of the what are you actually going to go and do tomorrow? Um, and yeah, just try and hold people's hands and guide them and actually make them do that and be the catalyst for actual change. So
Yeah.
we're going to start to wrap this up. So I'd love to know what's next in the pipeline for you and Let's Lightbulb.
I think I've always got two sides. So I've got a very fun workshop coming up when it's in 10 days in Boston with a really cool group out there that is all about making work fun, which is a big part of what I'm all about, and it's one of the reasons we're a good fit for each other. So I'm very much looking forward to that, just because it's going to be a great session with their leadership team, sort of their extended leadership team. It's a big group of about 60 people, but really focusing that around growth mindset and the sort of mindset stuff that we've talked about. That's the immediate big client project that I've got coming up. I'm also this 5 facets of fast. This is a pivot for me as the company. Before, I was very much just focused on the high ROI offsites, just as sort of one aspect. And so I'm building out, the website and the outreach and the marketing materials all around that. And I'm really excited about that, just because I think for the business itself, that's going to be unlocking a different way of engaging with clients and providing a different level of value. And so I'm in the process of, I guess, I don't know if beta testing is the right way, but doing that, testing the approach. Like, a lot of it is built on a lot of stuff I've done already, but it is a new build, if that makes sense. It's a new offer. And so when it's a new offer, you got to go do it a few times to get the testimonials about what you did there, because it's a different offer than what I was doing before, and rolling that out. But I'm really excited about that. And there's a lot of elements to that, and a webinar that I'm going to be building out, and then just all the marketing materials. So right now I'm kind of geeky about those two sides of it, and then like rolling that messaging more into my social content and all that. There's a lot involved in a pivot that you have to do, but I've also been true to our whole conversation. I've been experimenting with this in smaller ways, and now I'm making the bigger pivot. So a lot of it
Incredible.
is well tuned by this point. It's just a matter of
Yeah.
change.
Making it happen,
Yes.
practicing what we preach.
Yep.
It's
So
been
that's what's
absolutely
up in the pipeline for me.
fascinating conversation, and I mean, yeah, this conversation could go on all night. And I just want to say huge thank you for sharing all your experiences and all your wisdom and just for a fantastic conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. But Alex will probably close off in a Good Ideas Club traditional way.
Well, thanks again for having me, guys.
Yeah, awesome. So this is quite a hefty one, actually. You have the opportunity to choose an animal companion that's with you for the rest of your life. The options are wolf, bear, or a raven. Which one would you choose, and what would the relationship be as you move through life?
Is this a question for me?
It's
Oh,
actually like a Myers-Briggs test, apparently.
Okay.
I don't know.
It's an interesting question. Yeah, because I guess there's not a lot of rationality to it. It's just I feel like I would probably pick the wolf. Like, I'm just gonna not overthink it for a second. That's probably where I leaned. At first, I was going with the raven, but then I'm like, then it would just get annoying. Assuming that this companion animal is never going to eat you or be a danger to yourself. I think a wolf would be cool simply because if you're walking through life with a wolf, kind of like the Game of Thrones characters or whatever, that brings a certain confidence. And I like to almost imagine that that's the confidence I'm bringing into any situation or whatever. Confidence is such an underappreciated power. And I think I have more than many and not as much as some when it comes to confidence. But the idea, like, if we're going to go in and do a workshop, if you walked in and you had a wolf next to you and you're just walking through, it's just the way, it doesn't matter what the wolf does. It's the way it makes me feel that is the power, that you're covered, you got a certain swagger that you're going to bring to this, that yeah, this is going to be pretty kick-ass because I got a wolf. I think
that's a great answer. That's a great answer. And I draw another parallel, which is going to round this episode off perfectly. You mentioned at the start about you didn't really fit in, and you've got a really unique. You're the lone wolf, Tim.
Yeah.
Lone wolf with your wolf on your wolf on your side.
Except that now you're a pack by virtue of having the other wolf.
Yeah, true.
But that's okay. You got to find your pack too. There's a truth to that.
Very nice. Well, thank you. And yeah, really looking forward to seeing where this conversation and collaboration goes.
I love it. Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
I appreciate it. Yeah, looking forward to that one.
Cheers.
All right. Talk to you guys soon.
See ya.